I've been a detective for over 20 years, and even after handling countless cases, a few remain etched in memory in ways that time can't erase. One of those cases found me in November 2019 in Coral Springs, Miami. At the time, I was going through a relatively calm phase in my career, dealing mostly with local disputes and common cases. Life at the department was quiet until November 23rd, when I received a call that would forever change my perception of life's fragility and the secrets people keep. I remember that morning. I was still sipping my coffee, trying to slow down the pace of a busy week, when the department radio crackled urgently. It was a call from Coral Springs. The body of a young woman had been found near a car parked outside a house. The victim, Daniela Tabares Maya, was just 21 years old. On the radio, they said the police were called by a woman named Yvonne Serrano, a 51-year-old local resident. Yvonne claimed to have found the body, but something in her voice struck me as unusual, a hint of something that set me on edge before I even reached the scene. When I arrived, I was met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. Daniela's body lay beside the car, her face covered in blood, nearly unrecognizable. Yvonne, who had reported the case to 911, seemed shaken, but her posture betrayed something odd, an impression that years of dealing with people under pressure had taught me to pick up on. Yvonne explained she had found the body as she was leaving her house, but as she spoke, the details of her story seemed vague, as though she were piecing together a narrative on the spot. As the minutes passed, and I observed the scene more closely, it was clear there was more to this case than met the eye. Blood marks on Daniela's face, the spot where her body was found, and Yvonne's eerie silence created a sinister puzzle. This wouldn't be an easy case. I knew that from the first moment. Listening to Yvonne's 911 call, something inside me set off a silent alarm. Yvonne spoke in a low, hesitant tone, as if weighing each word. She said she had found an unidentifiable woman outside her house due to the blood. The first time I heard it, I found it strange. People in shock usually react chaotically, describing what they see as they try to process it all. But Yvonne sounded meticulous, as if she were making a formal statement instead of a desperate call for help. Each detail she described felt structured. She mentioned the body's position, said something serious had obviously happened, but she never named Daniela or even guessed at the victim's identity. In a neighborhood like this, you'd expect her to at least have a guess. But Yvonne remained cold, almost calculating, repeating that she didn't know who it was and that the face was unrecognizable. It felt less like a reaction and more like a choice. Rumors soon circulated that Yvonne and Daniela knew each other from the gym. Later, we confirmed that they had gone out together the night before. Knowing this made Yvonne's words on the call even more unsettling. She sounded so detached, so disconnected from the brutal death that had happened literally on her doorstep. I wondered many times why she would choose to distance herself from the victim with a story like that, and it was then I began to suspect something deeper, something she might be hiding behind this apparent indifference. Listening to that call repeatedly was crucial to catching the nuances that might have been missed on the first listen. Yvonne alternated between long pauses and quick descriptions, as if afraid to commit herself. Her choice of words and controlled tone echoed in my head, and with each new analysis, I was more convinced she knew more than she let on. A few days after the crime, as our team began to build a profile of Daniela and her relationships, a detail emerged that changed everything. We discovered that Yvonne and Daniela were more than strangers who crossed paths on a fateful night. In fact, they were gym buddies, saw each other regularly, and, according to friends, even had a friendly relationship. This fact shook the entire context we were building. It blurred the line between victim and suspect, and in this case, that's exactly what happened. The night before the crime became the focus of the investigation. That Friday, Yvonne and Daniela had gone out with friends, a seemingly common activity for them. Witnesses said the group went to the movies and then to a bar called Wardar, a well-known and popular spot in the area. Throughout most of the night, Daniela appeared calm, interacting normally with friends, while Yvonne, according to witnesses, was noticeably more intense. She seemed to keep a close eye on Daniela, almost as if she were trying to control her. At the end of the night, we discovered that Daniela offered to drive Yvonne home. Yvonne was visibly drunk, said friends, and wouldn't have been able to drive, so Daniela, in a gesture of kindness, volunteered to help her. To me, this detail always sounded strange. Knowing what happened next, I wonder if Daniela sensed any danger in that offer, or if she was just trying to be polite. That moment when they got in the car together still haunts my investigation as a turning point. The instant the two left the group and drove toward an outcome no one could foresee. Knowing Yvonne and Daniela knew each other added complexity to the case. That call was no longer a cold report about a stranger collapsed outside her house. Yvonne knew who Daniela was, knew what she did, and had spent an entire night with her. Her choice to omit this connection in the 911 call made me question her intentions even more. Reconstructing the events of that night began with accounts from the friends who were with Daniela and Yvonne. They remembered everything seeming normal when they went to the movies. It was a calm gathering among friends, with no signs that anything was out of the ordinary. Yvonne, though known for her intense personality, was in a good mood, interacting with everyone and making jokes. Daniela, on the other hand, seemed the kind of person everyone respected, a calming presence who seemed particularly attentive to Yvonne that night. It was as if she knew her friend would need help, but had no idea where that would lead. After the movie, the group went to Wardar, where things began to change. As the alcohol flowed, Yvonne seemed to transform. Friends reported that she became more aggressive, starting arguments for no apparent reason, especially with Daniela. Several times, they noticed Daniela trying to defuse the situation, asking Yvonne to calm down and trying to keep her close to avoid any trouble. Meanwhile, the other friends were beginning to feel uncomfortable, but no one suspected the night would end so tragically. By the end of the night, Yvonne was completely intoxicated, and that's when Daniela offered to take her home. There was genuine concern there. Daniela knew Yvonne wasn't in a condition to drive, and despite the tense interactions, she chose to ensure her friend's safety. To me, this detail is essential because it shows Daniela's generous side, someone who, even seeing Yvonne's troubled behavior, still chose to ensure her safety. It's the kind of gesture some would call naive, but it reflects a character that didn't judge others for their worst moments. As the two left the bar and got into the car, the friends were relieved. They thought that with Yvonne on her way home, the night would end peacefully. But that was the last time anyone saw Daniela alive. Something happened on that short drive, separating the bar from Yvonne's house. In that brief journey that should have been a simple ride, Daniela's fate was sealed. I wonder about her last thoughts, if she sensed anything strange, or if the impact was too sudden for her to process any sense of danger. One of the most disturbing details of this case came from neighborhood security footage. In the footage, Daniela's car is seen arriving at Yvonne's house around 2 a.m. A camera, strategically positioned at a nearby corner, shows the car pulling up in front of Yvonne's residence. The lights remain on, illuminating the sidewalk with that telltale glow that means the car is still running. Minutes drag on, and the lights stay there, motionless. For any investigator, this kind of detail is a clear sign that something was off. My first question was, why didn't Yvonne call the police immediately? Those 4 long, inexplicable hours between the car's arrival and the 911 call screamed mystery. Witnesses in the neighborhood also reported hearing no movement or suspicious noises during this period. Everything seemed quiet, but that silence hid something dark. It was as if Yvonne were waiting for something or trying to decide what to do. The fact that Daniela stayed outside, at Yvonne's doorstep, for so long only deepened my suspicion that Yvonne may have planned every detail of her version of events. Watching the video for the first time, I focused on that scene, analyzing each second as if, at any moment, it might reveal what really happened. Seeing Daniela's car arrive and remain there, with no sign of movement, was agonizing. In my mind, I wondered if Daniela was conscious, if any kind of argument occurred, or if Yvonne acted impulsively, turning a potential argument into something fatal. Only Yvonne could say what happened between 2 and 6 a.m., but until then, she seemed determined to keep those details to herself. In the end, the security footage raised more questions than it answered. Why did Yvonne wait so long to call 911? And what did she do during those 4 hours? This delay suggested a possible cleanup, a moment to construct a story, or perhaps a surge of panic. All sorts of theories ran through my head. As I watched that video repeatedly, the silence in the department was almost as oppressive as the one I imagined enveloping that stationary car outside Yvonne's house, where Daniela's life ended unnoticed by anyone. The inconsistencies in Yvonne's statements became more apparent with each interview, strengthening my suspicions that she was hiding something. In the initial questioning, Yvonne seemed hesitant, as if trying to remember details, but the problem was that these details changed with each new version she told. Her initial version was that she'd fainted right after arriving home and suddenly awoke beside Daniela's body. But as the investigation progressed and questions grew more probing, Yvonne began to add new elements to her story, as if adjusting it to fit the questions that exposed contradictions. At one point, Yvonne mentioned that she had noticed something unusual in Daniela's car upon arriving home, but still went inside and then supposedly fainted. When asked why she didn't call the police if she'd seen something suspicious, she backtracked, claiming she thought she was just dreaming. It felt like a desperate attempt to explain why she waited so long to call 911. Each time, it seemed like Yvonne was trying to maneuver around the points that didn't make sense, but her inconsistency only dug her deeper. Her vague, contradicting statements were the last thing I expected from someone genuinely in shock. The detail that stood out most was when, in one of her accounts, Yvonne claimed she didn't remember how Daniela ended up there. She said her memory was foggy, as if watching disjointed scenes from a movie. To me, it felt less like genuine confusion and more like an attempt to create a loophole in her narrative, perhaps hoping that her memory lapses might create enough doubt. This selective amnesia showed up precisely when we asked about specific moments between 2 and 6 a.m. somehow. She managed to remember random details from the night, but couldn't recall the critical points. With each new interrogation, it was clear that Yvonne was playing a game. Her answers were a poorly assembled puzzle, and the pieces she tried to fit didn't align. Deep down, I knew she was hiding something, but uncovering it and proving it became a real race against time. It was on the second forensic sweep of Daniela's car that we found one of the most incriminating pieces of evidence, a 9mm bullet casing with traces of gunpowder still on it. This discovery shifted the investigation completely. That spent casing, carelessly left behind, suggested that things had escalated faster than Yvonne could handle. The casing inside the car implied that, at some point, Yvonne and Daniela were in very close proximity during the shooting. Whether it was a struggle, an act of self-defense, or something else was still unclear. The bullet casing spoke volumes, but left many questions unanswered. Upon analyzing the casing, our specialists noticed it matched a common caliber, but suspicion grew when we found a gun at Yvonne's house. It was a 9mm pistol, and we immediately requested ballistic testing. The gun seemed to have been left unattended for a while, but the main thing was its match with the projectile that killed Daniela. Yvonne's gun, kept among other everyday belongings, gave an impression of casualness, as if she didn't expect us to find or link it to the crime so quickly. The combination of that bullet casing and the gun formed a direct line of suspicion. What troubled me was that Yvonne had never mentioned owning a gun. In none of her statements had she said anything about being armed or any reason for having a pistol at home. This silence was another puzzle piece, as if Yvonne calculated that omitting it could keep the mystery of the crime alive. She seemed to rely on the confusion her fragmented declarations created, but these two physical pieces, the casing and the gun, told a clearer story, one without room for evasions or confusion. The discovery of these items changed the tone of the investigation completely. They were concrete, undeniable evidence, proof she couldn't reinterpret. I knew Yvonne would try to argue, perhaps claiming the gun was just for safety or that someone else might have planted the casing. But in reality, this evidence left her with less room to maneuver. Little by little, the facts were aligning, and the net around Yvonne was tightening. Accounts of Yvonne's behavior that night were unanimous. From the beginning, she seemed tense, almost constantly irritable. Friends who were present remembered a different Yvonne that night. sharper, louder, giving terse answers and, at times, even intimidating those around her. Daniela, who had a calm and friendly presence, became the primary target of this hostility. Yvonne cast glances, interrupted conversations, and made comments that visibly unsettled Daniela. One witness mentioned that, at a certain point, it seemed Yvonne was testing Daniela's patience, almost as if looking for an excuse to blow up. The discomfort among the group grew as the night went on, especially when they arrived at the bar. Yvonne, visibly affected by the alcohol, became increasingly possessive of Daniela. Friends noted that she would pull Daniela aside to speak privately, only to return visibly irritated and casting suspicious glances at others around her. Daniela, they said, kept her calm, trying to diffuse the tension with light words and calm responses. But it was clear she was uncomfortable and unsure how to deal with Yvonne's growing aggression. The tension was palpable, and everyone in the group felt the impact of Yvonne's unstable behavior. This pattern of hostility wasn't new. Talking to others close to Yvonne, we learned she had a history of conflicts in social situations, especially when alcohol was involved. It wasn't the first time her aggression had emerged intensely. On other occasions, Yvonne had been involved in arguments and even minor incidents with acquaintances, often in public places. She was described as short-tempered, someone who, once provoked, became hard to rein in. This profile of someone who fluctuated between friendly and aggressive put everyone on edge. They knew Yvonne could switch states in a matter of minutes. For me, these accounts painted a coherent picture of what happened. They revealed a complex personality, someone who, beneath a calm exterior, held an intensity that few could understand. That night, with alcohol fueling her emotions, seemed to have been the tipping point. The friends sensed the discomfort in the air, but no one imagined that this tension would escalate into something fatal. However, looking at the reports as a whole, it's clear that Yvonne's hostility and lack of control were warning signs that, sadly, went unnoticed. A critical point that surfaced during the investigation was the suspicion that Yvonne had tampered with evidence. When analyzing the neighborhood security cameras, we noticed that footage from Yvonne's own camera was incomplete. When we checked the recordings, we found a suspicious gap precisely during the key hours of that night, between 2 and 6 a.m. At first, it seemed like a technical issue, but soon it was clear this was no coincidence. All signs pointed to Yvonne intentionally erasing parts of the video, conveniently omitting the moments when Daniela arrived at her house and the incident took place. When we confronted her about this discovery, Yvonne grew evasive, trying to argue that the camera might have been malfunctioning. She claimed the recording system was old and occasionally failed, but security technicians who inspected the equipment found that the footage had been erased manually, not due to a technical issue. This was decisive for us because a person in shock or someone innocent would hardly think to delete video recordings in the early hours after discovering a body. Yvonne, however, seemed to act with a calculated calm, erasing evidence that, without a doubt, would reveal what really happened between Daniela's arrival and the moment her body was found. Throughout the investigation, it became increasingly clear that Yvonne understood the importance of these images in reconstructing the crime. Erasing the videos wasn't a mere impulsive act. It was an attempt to hide any visual evidence that might contradict her versions of events. This deliberate blackout prevented us from confirming the gestures, movements, and interactions between the two, crucial details to understand what truly happened that early morning. The footage could have been our key piece, the definitive proof to show whether there had been an argument, an accident, or something premeditated. But by deleting it, Yvonne had practically signed an indirect confession that she was hiding something. What disturbed me most as a detective was recognizing the coldness with which she tampered with the evidence. Deleting security footage, especially knowing a crime had just occurred, indicated a level of calculation few suspects demonstrate. To erase those images, Yvonne had to access the system, select the exact times, and delete the files, all before making the 911 call. This detail, combined with her inconsistent statements, made it clear she was not just someone in shock, but someone determined to control the narrative of what happened that night. When we pieced all the evidence together, from the bullet casing in Daniela's car to the deleted footage, it became clear to us that Yvonne had to face severe charges. With all these elements, the prosecution opted to charge her with second-degree murder and evidence tampering. This charge reflected our belief that Yvonne had, at the very least, acted with complete disregard for Daniela's life, considering the hostile scene that night and the clear attempt to cover up the crime. It was a decision that brought some relief to the team and, above all, to Daniela's family, who sought justice with unwavering determination. However, as often happens in cases like this, Yvonne's defense team immediately went to work, looking for any loophole to challenge the charge. Their strategy was to question the idea of premeditation, arguing that Yvonne, intoxicated and mentally unstable, wasn't fully aware of her actions that night. The defense claimed that the incident was a tragic accident, driven by temporary factors and Yvonne's emotional instability. Their argument about her memory lapses and an emotional blackout reinforced this angle. For us, it was frustrating to see how they tried to turn what seemed like a calculated act into a one-time accident. After considerable pressure, negotiations, and analysis of the defense's arguments, the judge partially accepted their claims, reclassifying the charge from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter. This change significantly lowered the potential penalty, reducing the crime's severity in the eyes of the law. Involuntary manslaughter implies a lack of direct intent to kill, something that, according to the defense, aligned with Yvonne's state that night. The prosecution tried to argue that her history of conflicts and evidence tampering indicated otherwise, but ultimately, the court accepted the version that the act hadn't been premeditated. This reclassification brought a bitter sense of defeat, especially for Daniela's family, who had hoped for a fitting sentence. For us, as investigators, it was a hard lesson on the limitations of the justice system. Although the evidence pointed to a deliberate act, the defense managed to create a convincing enough narrative to soften the charge. Yvonne would still stand trial, but under an involuntary manslaughter charge, meaning her sentence potential no longer fully reflected the gravity of what we believed were conscious and dangerous choices made that morning. In 2021, Yvonne was unexpectedly released on bail, a decision that caught us all off guard. Her defense argued that, aside from not being a flight risk, she faced severe mental health issues and alcohol dependency, which, according to them, had driven her actions that night. They claimed that rather than punitive measures, Yvonne needed intensive treatment. This argument weighed with the judge, who agreed to release her upon payment of substantial bail and on the condition that she be sent directly to a specialized rehabilitation center. Seeing Yvonne walk free, even if temporarily, was a difficult moment for me and the team who had worked tirelessly on the case. It felt like an inversion of justice. After all, Daniela wouldn't have the same chance to move on, and now Yvonne was being treated as more of a patient than a criminal. The system, in this instance, seemed to view rehabilitation as a safer path than incarceration, hoping that treatment might prevent a repeat of her violent behavior. Yvonne's attorneys emphasized that this program would help her confront the issues that, according to them, had triggered her actions that night. The decision to send her to rehab was painful for Daniela's family, who saw it as a betrayal by the justice system. They had fought for accountability, only to see the court lean in favor of what they saw as a lenient response. For them, it felt as though the victim had been forgotten. At the hearing, Daniela's mother showed up with photos of her daughter, reminding everyone of the young woman who had lost her life that night. For her, and for us, it was difficult to accept that Yvonne's accountability was being softened by the promise of treatment rather than real justice. During Yvonne's time in rehab, we received periodic updates on her behavior, mainly because her bail conditions required her to complete the program without any incidents. Any violation or indication that she wasn't serious about recovery would mean her bail would be revoked. Knowing that her freedom was conditional on genuine rehabilitation gave us a small sense of hope that at the very least, something positive might come of this situation. But to most of us, it felt like a temporary fix for what we feared was a deeper, more troubling character trait. Unfortunately, our suspicions were soon confirmed. Yvonne's time in rehab turned out to be filled with incidents. The reports we received indicated that she continued to display aggressive and unmanageable behavior, directing hostility toward both the other patients and the center's staff. Right from the beginning, she struggled to maintain the discipline required by the program, engaging in frequent arguments and ignoring therapists' and counselors' guidance. For me, these reports were a grim confirmation of what we had sensed all along. Yvonne saw rehab not as a chance to change, but as a convenient way to avoid prison. One account that stood out was from a counselor who described an explosive incident during a group therapy session. Yvonne had gotten into a heated argument with another patient, raising her voice and making threats that left the group uncomfortable. Staff intervened, but Yvonne refused to calm down and only escalated her aggression, even challenging the authority of the therapists. This kind of behavior was recorded multiple times, not only with patients but with staff as well, showing a complete lack of commitment to the rehabilitation process. For us, following from a distance, it was apparent that Yvonne's aggression wasn't just linked to alcohol, but was a deeply ingrained trait. The rehab center tried repeatedly to give Yvonne more chances. They adjusted her treatment, changed her counselors, and even tried new approaches to help her manage her anger. But none of it worked. With each failed attempt, it became evident that Yvonne wasn't willing, or perhaps even able, to change. To the rehab center, which was home to dozens of other patients genuinely working to overcome their struggles, Yvonne had become a threat to the therapeutic environment. In the end, the administration made the difficult decision to expel her, documenting that her presence was no longer viable. Following her expulsion, the court was immediately notified, and her bail was swiftly revoked. Yvonne was taken back into custody to await the final trial. For us, it was a harsh reminder of the limitations of certain justice system approaches. Yvonne, with or without alcohol, displayed destructive and destabilizing behavior, confirming what we had feared all along. In 2023, as the case finally progressed to the final stages, we were met with a surprising new tactic from Yvonne's defense team. During a crucial hearing, she invoked the Fifth Amendment, a constitutional right in the United States that allows individuals to refuse to testify to avoid self-incrimination. This decision had an immediate and profound impact on the case, especially for those of us who had hoped that, with time, she might finally reveal what had happened in Daniela's last moments. By choosing silence, Yvonne closed off any hope for a direct and definitive resolution. For Daniela's family, this choice was like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. Her mother, in particular, showed up in court, visibly pained, hoping for answers that now seemed lost. To her, Yvonne's refusal to testify was an affront, a deliberate choice to keep the truth hidden. Watching her go through this silent anguish was painful, knowing that the last shreds of hope for clarity were now gone. Yvonne's silence didn't just disrupt the legal process. It was a reminder of the missing pieces that would forever haunt the investigation. Even with the physical evidence, the unanswered questions about what truly happened in the car, in the house, and during those crucial early morning hours remained unfilled. To many, Yvonne's choice to remain silent seemed like a veiled admission of guilt. But under the law, her right to silence was protected. The Fifth Amendment invocation was a final blow to any hope of a complete resolution. In a system that respects the right to silence, the truth couldn't be forced to come out. The case concluded with a fragmented narrative, leaving Yvonne as an enigmatic figure surrounded by mystery and doubt. Today, years after the investigation and numerous attempts to find answers, Daniela's family remains determined to seek justice. They continue to push for clarity and to remind the public of the questions that remain unanswered from that fateful night. The time between 1:25 and 2 a.m., when Daniela and Yvonne left the bar and headed to Yvonne's home, remains a source of deep anguish for the family. Those short minutes, which should have been ordinary, were the ones that sealed Daniela's fate and reshaped her family's world forever. Daniela's mother, especially, has become an unwavering figure in the fight for answers. She participates in interviews, organizes vigils, and meets with other parents who've experienced similar tragedies, trying to keep the case alive and ensure that authorities don't forget. She expresses a quiet hope that one day, something will surface, perhaps a witness or a piece of evidence, to finally shed light on those last moments. It's an intense, emotional battle, one that continues despite the slim chances of a satisfying conclusion. For the family, Yvonne's silence isn't just a strategy. It's a personal affront, a barrier blocking them from understanding what happened. They feel that without clear answers, the case isn't truly closed. They hold on to hope that, even if justice can't be complete, some fragment of truth will eventually emerge. For us, the investigators, this case has left a lingering sense of frustration and resignation. We know that some answers may never come, that certain details might be lost forever in the silence of that night. But like many cases, there remains a quiet hope that, with time, something unexpected might come to light. A new lead, a late testimony, or anything that could finally illuminate what transpired between those two women on that dark morning. Until then, a void remains. Not just for Daniela's family, but for those of us who still believe that justice is more than a verdict. It's also finding the truth.